All right, I think we can probably start off then. So, what the session is really all about, right? So today we have a workshop where we're going to be going through the July dataset for Onyx Data DNA Challenge. And the main idea about these sessions is I try to go through the data set and kind of pinpoint you towards some of the things that I would recommend you to take a notice of, talk about the data set in general, kind of how you can approach it, how you can analyze it, and so forth. And of course, give you some practical tips on what visuals to use, for example, what sort of configuration options to use, and kind of what to look into. Right? Because at the end of the day, remember that everything I say is basically just an insight of what potentially you could be using. The fact that you afterwards decide, okay, well, I'm actually going to be going with a different visual or a different visual setup, that's completely fine. It's completely up to you guys to create the reports that you feel confident on viewing, presenting, and everything else in between, right? The main idea about the challenges is just try to learn something new, right? There's no reason that you have to kind of be repetitive all the time and just do the same thing all over and over again. Try out something new. Whether it's, for example, if you haven't tried out field parameters, try to play around with those, some information overlays, different switches between the visuals, different configuration options. Just, treat this as a playground where you can make mistakes, learn from them, and then just create better reports at the end. So for the challenge itself, my colleague Leon already posted the link to the challenge site itself. Let me just quickly open it up and share the screen and kind of quickly take you through the main things as always. So don't forget that once you go into the challenge the challenge page itself, you need to register for the challenge in order to get the data set. Because prior to this, you're not going to be seeing this button right here, get the data set. So you're not going to be able to download the data set. Once you download the data set, there's actually two things that come with this. So one of them is going to be the actual Excel file where you have the data itself, and it's going to look something like this. Well, it's going to look exactly like this in reality. You're going to have two different tables. There's going to be a fact table, there's going to be one-dimensional table, and there's going to be a dictionary. Dictionary is just basically a way on how we define and tell you what does each column represent, right? So that's one of the things. The other thing is you also gonna receive, let me see if I have it open. Yeah, I have it right here. So the other thing you're gonna receive in that zip folder that you're gonna download is gonna be a cheat sheet. So the cheat sheet is basically a way on how we provide information to you as to what visuals are replaceable with one of our visuals, right? For example, let's say you would typically use an area chart for it. You can easily do that with a Combo Pro visual. The main idea about this is for you guys just to understand, okay, what are the alternative options on how I could kind of approach this, right? If you're looking for stacked clusters or anything, whether it's categorical data, whether it's time-based data, each visual has its own kind of setup of what it can do. So don't be afraid to take a look at the cheat sheet and kind of get some ideas on what visuals to use here, right? So that's all going to be there. What else? Do not forget about the option of using the Academy. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the resources. I just want you to be as prepared as possible. So we do have the Academy, academy.zoomcharts.com. I'm going to just copy the link and paste it to you guys. So let's say in this particular report, let's say you want to focus on the graph visual. So you go right here, drill down Graph Pro, open it up. You have a course where I go through the visual and explain, okay, what is the visual typically used for? What kind of main formatting options you have? What sort of styling blocks you have? What configuration options you have? And everything in between, right? Do I cover everything? Most definitely not. The main reason for that, it's kind of impossible to cover everything. But it's a very good point as to kind of get a base on what the visual can do for you. And of course, if you have any questions, don't forget we have an amazing team behind that's organizing all of these events. And if you have any questions, just send a message to webinars@zoomcharts.com. Right? If you have any screenshots, sample data sets, anything that we can, kind of would help us to understand your situation that you're trying to kind of solve there, or the use case that you're trying to apply this to, the more the merrier, right? The main thing is for us to understand what exactly you're trying to do there, because it's very hard to help people who tell, for example, the visual doesn't work, and you're just sitting there like, okay, how does it not work? Does it not filter? Does it not interact? Does it not change colors? What am I supposed to be looking at? So any questions, anything, just send it to our team at webinars@zoomcharts.com, and we'll get back to you on that. Whether it's regarding the accounts, for example, the developer accounts, whether it's regarding the challenge itself or the visuals, just send us the questions and we'll get back to you. All right, so the Academy is, of course, one of the resources. And the other thing which you can do is, for example, if you just Google AppSource Graph Pro, you're going to find the Microsoft App Store store. And in this store, one of the things that's always available to you is this one right here, the sample report. So the sample report is just another way on how we provide similar to information as to what you have in the Academy. Hey, Gordy. Yeah, the event has been running for 8 minutes now. If you are unable to join, I would recommend just try to reopen the link or the invitation link again. Just to make sure that everything's good on my side. You guys can hear me, right? I'm not just talking to myself. Just gonna quickly double check that. Because you never know. Technical difficulties, they come when you least expect. Yes, okay, perfect. So the App Source sample is something you can also download and use for your references, see how some of the things have been set up and so forth. Also, if that's not even enough, go to the ZoomCharts website, the Power BI section of it, and open up report examples. And here you can find some of the reports for certain visuals that are being used. For example, I don't know, if you're using the graph visual right here, for example, HR workload report is one of them. And if you want to see how we have set up certain things, you can download the P/X file. Again, remember, there's a lot of resources that we provide to you, right? It's completely up to you to whether you want to use them or not, but just take them into account that there is a possibility to use them. And of course, one other option that you do have is you do have the possibility of scheduling individual sessions with me. So for example, if you go right here, you can see the one-on-one mentoring sessions are going to be available till the 25th of July. So you can also schedule a session with me whenever I have available time slots. Use that, get some feedback, ask your questions about the setup or anything that you're kind of concerned about. Let's just have a good time and, you know, help each other. Let's put it like that. All right. If you have any other questions during the webinar, yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is if you have any questions during the webinar, I would recommend you guys to post them in the Q&A section of the chat, just because it would help me to make sure that I get basically answers to all of them, because it's quite easy to miss something in just regular chat, right? It scrolls down faster sometimes, so it might be that I missed something. So Q&A section is where I can go basically a question by question basis. All right, now as far as the data set itself goes, so let's quickly open up the Excel file and quickly kind of run through it. So we have two different things here, like I mentioned. You have emails table and you have contacts table. And one of the things that we did here is to kind of, for those of you who are new to Power BI and data analysis in general, because some of you are more advanced in this area, some of you are new. The new guys and new girls who are trying this out, do not get discouraged by the fact that I said something like that, right? It has nothing to do with anything. It just gives you a little bit of background on top. That's it. Doesn't mean that new members cannot win the challenges. We've had that before. New members can also win the challenges because they just want it more. But well, one thing we try to do here in this case is also give you some of the terms which are going to be used throughout your data analyst career, right? And one of the things that we provide here is the fact table and dimension table. The reason why we're doing this is because in Power BI, one of the things you're going to hear a lot is you always have to create a good data model, and it's very good if you create, for example, something like a star schema, which basically means you have a fact table, means it has a lot of entries. Essentially, think about it like as a transactional database, right? You have all the entries for every single transaction that has ever happened in the store. And then you have dimensions. Dimensions are additional tables which allow you to define or explain a certain area of it. So the best way on how I could represent this is think about it like this, right? So for example, in the fact table, so this is where we have all our transactions. In this case, emails being sent, right? All the transactional emails. And here we can see that, for example, the sender was Leona McCary, and she's from the executive management department. Now, if I wanted to describe executive management department, I could essentially create multiple columns in the same table and say that, okay, there's this many employees, it should always be represented in color green, it belongs to Aura, something like that, right? And just extend the current table. The other way around it is if you create a dimensional table where you can say that, for example, okay, this is the name, this is the department, this is the email, this is the image you're going to be using for this particular person, this is her level of seniority, this is the department color, this is the aura, and so forth, right? So instead of extending already existing table, you're creating so-called dimensional table, which is an addition to the fact table. The reason why this is recommended is because it allows you to go through the data a lot faster. Because think about it like this, right? The more columns you have within a single entry that you kind of have to parse and read through, the heavier it is for Power BI to do that. Because every single time you, for example, filter out just one single row, it also has to filter out 20 different columns. Now, if that's not everything you need straight away, it is something that allows you to kind of go around it. So Katja mentioned that data not visible, too blurred to read. It could be the connection on your side. The one thing that I could recommend is try to reconnect. Or the other thing I could do is maybe just increase the size of the text a little bit. Maybe that's going to help. But yeah, that's one of the things. So make sure you take a look at how the fact tables and dimension tables are being set up, right? What's good practice and how this is being sort of populated afterwards in the relationship model. Now, if we go to Power BI and once we load in the data, there's a couple of things that we can do here, right? We can, of course, look at all the data and we can see that essentially the way that this data set has been structured is it gives you a row by row basis of every single email, and it tells you who sent it, to whom it's sent, and different other properties on top of it. Like we mentioned, department, seniority, and so forth, the date of it, whether it was opened or not, and so forth, right? So one of the things that has this sort of approach, or when it comes to visual perspective, is a graph visual. So a graph visual is a visual that allows you to showcase different relationships, but there's a specific way on how you do that. And you do that by providing essentially the main two properties. You provide the source and a target. So for example, if I add a graph visual to the report itself, you can notice these three fields right here. These are the mandatory fields. So source node, target node, and value. So you have to define what is connected to what and what sort of value is it transferring. And this is one key point you have to understand. The graph visual works as a relationship, right? So every single value you use here within the value field means that, for example, if you have a row of data, let's put it like this, right? If I just go enter data, just so I have somewhere to put in some information. So let's say like this, right? A is the source, B is the target, and the value is 10. So this row of data, what it represents and what it means is that A is transferring value of 10 to B. So if you would look at it as, a node value as such, it would mean that currently, if we assume that everything else before that started at 0, it would end up with A being minus 10 and B being plus 10. Because if you started out with zeros on both sides, right, A just transferred 10 of his value to B, it means he's now in the negative. So that's one of the things you have to understand about the graph visual as a default sort of approach, right? It tells you the value that is being transferred. And as far as the setup goes, there's a couple of things you can do here. And there's a reason why we have this data itself created in this particular layout. So you can see we always have from multiple properties and to multiple properties, right? So I could say, for example, I just want to understand how different departments are communicating between each other. So what I would do is I would say that I want to use from department. It's connected to the to department. So that's the source, that's the target, and the value that's being transferred is I want to see the count of emails. The one thing we can see here is executive management has sent out the most emails, right? The default behavior is the higher the value, the bigger the node. However, if you decide that, okay, but this value is now really something I want to showcase, right? Because currently it shows you the value of outgoing. You can go into the formatting options, nodes default category. That is if you're working with default categories. You find a property called value format, and you can see there's few other options here. That is because if you treat it as a transactional database, we could, for example, say that, hey, I want to see the in and outgoing, meaning that one value that you see currently right here represents the number of incoming emails. The other value represents the number of outgoing values. By default, we don't enable affixes straight away because this is completely up to you. But I mean, I think you would all agree with me that without having the affixes, it's kind of hard for me to understand, okay, what am I sending out? What's coming really in, right? So one of the things that you can do here is, like I said, enable affixes. And that's going to at least provide the user with a little bit of better understanding of what's incoming value and what's the outgoing value, right? You can decide whether you want to put this in the label itself or within the node, or if you want to place it outside, because I can go ahead and say I want to have this also in the outside, right? So there's nothing in the node specifically, but I just want to have everything outside. So it's really up to you to play around with these and figure out how you want to showcase the values. Because you could also do something like this, for example. You could say outgoing minus incoming. So 239 emails is the number that you get when you subtract the incoming emails versus the outgoing values. So for example, if we assumed that every single person, when they say that send out an email, they would need to get a receipt for every single one of those emails. Then I would go for something like in versus out. And in this case, executive management is in the minus of 239 emails. So they sent out more than 240 emails extra than what they have received. So Gori, this is the graph visual, Graph Pro. It's going to be this one. Drill down Graph Pro filter. Now, what else? If you look at the fields itself, you're going to notice that, for example, source nodes and target nodes can only accept a singular column. So for example, let's say, okay, we have the from department, but I also wanted to see the from name. You can see that we don't really have the possibility to do that. So we're replacing either it's one or the other. The reason for this is because, like I mentioned, it only accepts a singular column. So one of the things that you can do here is, again, play around with the field parameters. So for example, if I go ahead and under modeling, go new parameter fields, I would do something like this. The parameter itself, I would probably call source nodes. Then go under the emails table and just drag in name and department. So I'm going to have these two. And I would do the same for the target. The reason why this would be applicable or why this could be interesting is on the first page right here. I already did it, so I don't have to spend more time doing that, right? Is, for example, to do something like this. Now I have these two slicers. These slicers are created based on the field parameters that I previously created by adding the from name and from department. And in the target node, it's to name to department. You can actually see it right here. I explicitly, intentionally kind of actually left the original names. The reason why this is interesting, or let's say beneficial, is because now I can allow the end user, not the developer, but the end user, to choose which column am I going to be using in the source column or the target column. So let's say we want to focus on the department level, fine. So from department to department, that's all good. But at some point, somebody says, okay, I actually want to see from department to individual users. right? You would have to either create a new visual or have to create a new page, or have basically, if you think about it, we have 4 different options here, right? So you would have to create 4 instances of the visual and then try to figure out, okay, how do I squeeze all of them in? This allows you to do this dynamically. You allow the user to say, hey, within the visual, what I'm doing is I'm using the field parameters, and then I'm using the slicers as the drivers for it. And I can say, okay, I want to see departments connected to names. I want to see names connected to departments. And just playing around with these values and allowing the user to kind of drive and say, okay, what exactly am I trying to look at here? And what do you try to represent with the available data, right? What is it that you're focusing on? Raskom had a question. Can you create hover tooltips on the bubbles? So yeah, and there are 2 ways on how you can do this. So for example, when we just hover over a particular node right now, you can see nothing happens, right? However, if you right click on it, it's going to call out a tooltip. So that is the default behavior. However, if you want to make sure that the user gets a tooltip whenever he hovers over it, right, the node, not the right click, you can go into the formatting options, find tooltip settings, and enable it. And now whenever I hover over it, you can see this is now being shown automatically, right? The reason why we have the right click by default instead of the hover tooltip is because the hover tooltip is not something that would allow us to have interactive elements within it. So for example, if I would wanted to kind of get on top of the tooltip, I can't really do that, right? But if I right click, that's the context menu. You can see in this case, I just have one option, and that is to hide the particular node. But there is something that I can do or utilize here to get more information, whether it's active hyperlink, which is also something that we support, whether it's close and expand functionality. There's also other things that we do support in the tooltip, which are not going to be available on the hover tooltip. So make sure you play around with those features and just see, okay, which one is beneficial in this particular use case, right? So just to kind of give you an idea of what I mean by hyperlinks and so forth, let me open up a different sample because I just don't have links available in that one straight away. So I don't want to waste your guys' time, and I would just want to, save it. So in this sample, I'm going to go with source, target, and some sort of a value. So if I right click on it, you can see the default values, so the name and the value. In the fields list, I scroll down to the bottom, and you can see we have source tooltip, target node tooltip, and link tooltip. So there's 3 different tooltips. And what I'm going to be using is, I'm going to be using this column right here, which is only HTML. What it looks like is like this. So this one has just a little bit of HTML knowledge behind it, so to provide the display name. Right? But if I just would use a regular hyperlink, actually I can quickly showcase that to you as well. Let's create a new column. Let's call it URL. Let's put it, that's not the right value that I copied. Went a little overboard there. Only HTML. Copy. Let's create URL. Okay, fine. I'm just gonna do this. Or actually, let's do it like this with ZoomCharts page. There we go. So I'm gonna put that in. I'm gonna put that also in the tooltip. So if I right click on it, you can see the difference, right? So display name is just a property that allows you to define how exactly is the link gonna look like. But if you just paste a URL, well, it's gonna truncate the URL. You can go under the formatting options, tooltip settings right here and define how many characters you want there. I could go and say, hey, I actually want 50 characters, right, to kind of extend it. But if it's the whole URL, I think, guys, you will agree with me, it's not very efficient, right? So having something like a display name is a lot more efficient. And the whole reason why I was doing this is because, like I said, these are active hyperlinks. So if I click on it, it's going to take me to a different page, to a separate browser page right here, and we can look at the graph visual, for example. So it's one of the things that we do support, and that's also supported actually in the scatter plot visual that we released, which is still in beta, but this is also supported there. So that's one of the things. The other thing that you can do here is if I go to this particular page, yeah, perfect. So you can see we previously only had that hide option, right? However, in this scenario, if I right click on it, you can see we actually have a few more options here available. So there's something like expand, and then suddenly full expand, and then just different arrows going different directions. Now, why this is available is because this particular example has so-called source, not really source, but focus node navigation. Trust me, those are just seeming like very big words, but in essence, what it allows you to do is to create an experience like this. If I click on the node C, I open up the one level below it. If I click on BN, I open up one level below it. If I click back on C, it closes all the child nodes. So you basically allow the user to choose the path that he wants to explore. I could, of course, just go ahead and have everything visible, just a typical hierarchy tree. But to be fair, if I'm only interested in one specific group of the nodes, why should I be looking at the extra 30, 40, or whatever it is, right? Let the user define where he wants to go and how he wants to explore these things. And in order to achieve this, there are a few things that we need to do. So first of all is we need to define so-called focus nodes. And how it's done is pretty simple. In the dataset itself, you need an additional column. Either one or two, that depends on the particular use case, but you need an additional column called focus nodes. You can call it, of course, whoever you want, but the values you want to have within them is either 1 or 0, meaning that 1 is true, 0 is false. And what I'm doing in this particular case is you can see that 1 is applicable or seen for those cases where source is B. So the only focus node I have in this particular sample is the B node. Now, if I go to my sample report or the visual itself, right, you can see that, okay, but I see the B node plus one level below it. That is actually something you control. So if I go under navigation, there are two properties that allow you to control how the chart acts upon your request, basically. So there's an initial expansion level and expansion radius. Initial expansion levels means how many additional layers are you showcasing prior to the user interacting with the visual. So if I would change this to 0 and I would reset the visual, you can see I can only see the B node. The other thing, the node expansion radius defines how many levels you open up with each individual click. So for example, if I set this on 2, now clicking on B node is actually going to open up 2 layers additionally, right? Previously we went 1 by 1. If I set it on 2, that's 2 levels. If I set it back on 1, start at B, click on B, go 1 down, just go level by level, right? So you decide how you want to investigate and kind of control the way that this goes through the visual itself. And the reason why I'm showcasing you these features is because one of the things that I want you to kind of tackle with this challenge is the graph visual. I know it's not going to be the easiest one. Also, it's not a prerequisite, just so you guys understand. It's not, a mandatory thing you have to do. But the data set has been created in a way that it allows you to play around with the graph visual in a lot of interesting ways. Sure, the graph visual, once you first look at it, kind of might seem a little bit intimidating because it has, I think, 30 fields at this point, right? But it's not a chaos. It's a structure. So first you have your 3 mandatory fields, and then you have things that go for the source node, target node, and link. So for the node itself, you can define things like images, colors, labels, shapes, classes, radiuses, whether it's a focus node or not, whether you're using an aura for it or not. Then all the same properties can be defined for a target node. Then you have a lot of different options for the links. And then, of course, the tooltips. So there are multiple ways on how you can play around with the graph visual. Like, for example, this one right here, you can see also utilizes a property called auras. Auras are these areas that you see kind of drawn around these. The reason why it could be good is, well, there are a few things in how it could help you. One of them is it could help you identify outliers, or it just allows you to identify certain areas that are overlapping. Like, for example, let's say you can see I have two different donut charts right here. So I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, I want the sales and the product team. Those are the two senders and all the recipients that I want to see. What auras allow me to see is, for example, we can see that these, for example, are the employees, two of the employees who are in connection between both of the departments. So that's how the information kind of getting transferred goes. And the aura allows me to understand to which department they belong to. So that's one of the use cases for it. The other one is, for example, not necessarily for this sample, but just to kind of give you an idea, right, of what auras are good for. Maybe that's going to spark a different, thought process in your mind, and that's going to give you a better understanding, because we all kind of understand information differently, so that's fine. So one of the common use cases for auras is, for example, for AML, so anti-money laundering. And in this case, what auras is being used for is to showcase the nodes where information is overlapping, or it's overlapping actually multiple times. So wherever you see an overlap of the colors means that's a point of interest. Whether it's the same address, whether it's the same social security number, whether it's the same bank account, whatever it is, it kind of makes you look at the information up closer, right? The same can be done also for email exchanges. Like I said, for example, this would be a different approach to the same, let's say, question in mind. Different departments, communication between departments, we can see who's the guy in between, who's part of, kind of considered to be part of both departments, right? Who's the guy that communicates between, who's the key person between these two departments, right? Whether it's one, whether there's multiple, you can go ahead and look at it with auras. You can also play around with colors. Like, for example, if I disable the auras, so I'm just going to remove them right here from the formatting options, you also have department colors that we have already predefined. You can remember, guys, the data sets that we give you are not hard set in stone, meaning that if there is something that you want to enhance on top of them, go ahead and do that. You're more than welcome to do that. Anything that helps you to make this a little bit more interesting, right? The same as if you go right here into the challenge page. Let me just quickly open it up. Right? For example, the brief, you go through it and see, okay, what are some of the highlights? We don't define the things you need to answer. We're giving you some ideas on what you could answer, right? We're telling you that we have sentiment analysis there. We're telling you there's an open rate, for example, that you can investigate, but it's completely up to you. And if you see that just by adding an additional column of, I don't know, some sort of topic or something, it could be also interesting, do that. But yeah, regarding the colors, which is something I started to talk about, is, for example, let's go ahead and go for department to department, just as an example, right? And then we have the two tables that are connected. Now I'm going to use department color in two places: the source node color and also the target node color. Now it might seem a little bit unnecessary. Why do I have to do the same thing twice? It's quite simple. The way that these nodes are being treated is one of three stages: whether it's a source node, whether it's a hybrid node, or it's a target node. A hybrid state means that at the same time, the node is considered to be a source and a target. Like, for example, let's say product development currently. We can see that there's information coming in with the link decorations, and there's also information going out. So the product development team has been sending out emails and receiving emails, right? Makes sense. So it's a hybrid node. What happens if it's a hybrid node? You're taking the source node properties, because source is the primary object. Target is a secondary object. But there might be instances where some of these nodes become only target nodes, right? They're no longer source nodes. So for example, if I disable or delete the target node colors and switch to names, you can see that all names are yellow, right? I gave the source node colors, but the source nodes are the departments. the individual names or users or employees are target nodes. I don't have a defined color for them. I have it on the department level, but not for an individual user. However, if I again drag in the department color and I can put it in here and then just move to target node color, you can see that suddenly instead of all of them being yellow, we can actually see multiple colors based on the department that they belong to. In this example, one of the things that you can also notice is, for example, something to always pay attention to. And we've talked about this in other showcases or even the top 5 announcements multiple times. Make sure that the color you're assigning to a particular department or team or whatever it is, or sentiment, or, if there's any particular reason why you're doing something with a color, make sure it stays the same throughout the whole report. The reason why I'm saying this is because currently in the data set, for example, you have these colors predefined. Like if we go to the department color, you can see these are just, color names: red, yellow, blue, orange, whatever it is. Now, if you decide that you have some sort of a palette that you're using from Microsoft, or if you have your own color palette, or if you decide to create a new color palette and you're using other visuals, these colors might not work exactly the same way. So just make sure that you sort of synchronize the colors between the visuals. And what I've done here is, for example, if I filter out executive management, you can see that executive management's orange here, but in this one it's red, right? So it might cause a little bit of confusion for the end user. So what I would do, I would just revisit the original color sorting and redefine them. Since these are particular colors, for example, coming from a color palette, I don't really know the name for them. Like it is orange, right? But which shade of orange is that? So what you can do is always, don't forget about this. This is a very important kind of crucial tip whenever you're recreating your own reports. Sometimes when you need to get the color, the main thing you have to do is just open up formatting options. Find the property where the color gets assigned, like in this case, the category colors. Click on the color, click more options, and this right here is the hex code for the color. So just copy this and replace some original values. In my case, what I'm actually going to do quickly is, let's do it like this. I'm going to open up Power Query, and just for executive management, for one thing, I'm going to quickly replace it and say department color. So executive management, so red is actually going to be this. That's the hex code for the color that's used in the other visuals. There you go. So now if I filter out executive management, it's the same all over the place, right? And you've heard probably me say this before. It's a small little detail, but these small little details do matter. It allows you to tell the story with the visuals. And plus it also looks a lot better than whether it's 100 different shades of different colors and it's kind of hard to understand what am I looking at. So that's one of those things. What else? Are a lot of different properties that you can use here to kind of look at what's available to you. So for example, we do have emails, so we know the total amount of emails. In the data set, we have a column which is opened. Basically, it tells you whether or not the recipient has opened the particular email, which means that, well, theoretically, we can also go ahead and calculate the number of unopened emails and opened emails. So I created 2 additional metrics right here: total, open, unopened. Now what I can do with this information, I'm going to also create another calculation, which is going to be the open rate. So I want to understand if people are actually reading what they're receiving, especially since this is communication within a company, right? This is not spam that you're getting. Well, there might be some, but there are a few rules on how to avoid those as well, or to exclude them from this particular data set, right? If that would be the case. But in this case, this is the communication between the company employees. And what I'm seeing here is basically 9% of employees are not opening up their emails. Well, 9% of the emails have not been opened. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to have to create, for example, a timeline. So we also do have a date, right? So that's one of the things. If you look at the data set as well, one of the things we have here is, I think it was, yeah, this one, within workdays and within work hours. If we open up the Excel, what does it mean within work hours? Within work hours means that the email has been sent within the time frame of 9 to 6 p.m., right? If we look at the visual currently, let me go back to the visual. The only thing I could really put on a timeline is, especially since if we look at the date, it's just March, starting from 1st of March, ending up with 31st of March, right? Means I could only create, for example, something like this. I can only showcase the daily granularity, right? People can only look at days, which is not bad, but I can always enhance it because people still can do this. For example, I don't know, I'm looking at these particular days, create a selection, see how many emails have been sent, what's the open rate, and so forth, right? What's the average, what's the highest, minimum, and so forth. Play around with these. But what it allows me to do is add another dimension by adjusting the time. So since I know that is within working time, or whatever it is called, within work hours, if this column is yes, it means that the email has been sent between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. So what I could do is I can create a random function and say if the within working hours is yes, then return a random number between 9 and 18, right? I don't necessarily even have to go into minutes. Let's just stick with hours, for example, first. Okay, I get a column with random hours from 9 to 18, right? 6 p.m. Cool. I can use that within a visual. That's now my hourly timeline. And the user can now look at days and also go deeper into the day and see what particular hours were most emails sent or received, right? When is the open rate most critical? Is it in the evenings, early morning, during the day? What's happening there? So there are multiple ways in how you can look at this. What I've done in this particular visual is I've played around with two setups. So just to kind of recreate it step by step, I'm going to go ahead and have a timeline. Within a timeline, I have the date and I have total emails. And the legend that I'm using is opened column. Am I blind? Yes. So is open. Basically, open rate is what I'm looking at. Okay. And you can see here the default hierarchy is year, quarter, month, day. Sorry for the Latvian, but it's year, quarter, month, day. So if I would do a drill down, I would just basically go from one column to one column to one column, and then I would split the days. So what I can do is, knowing that this data set might be extended further on, right? Currently, it would make no sense to force the user to go through the different drill down levels. So what I can do is go ahead and say that under formatting options, initial display unit, switch to custom, and say it's going to be day. Now, what this means is whenever you open up this particular page, the chart is going to be on daily level. The user can still zoom out, for example, and go to a monthly level, weekly level, quarterly level, or whatever is in the hierarchy, but you're not forcing him to go through all levels of the hierarchy, right? And whenever new data comes in, for example, we get an addition of an additional month, 2 months is going to be fine, most likely to just have on a daily basis, right? 3, 4 months, it kind of becomes very small to read. So maybe a monthly view now is a little bit better. So just different options on how you're looking at things. Now, what I was doing here as well is I don't really want to compare opened versus unopened, because clustering usually is when you're comparing one versus the other. What I want to do is I want to see how they stack together and create the total value. So what I'm going to do is go to series defaults and switch the display to stacked. All right, perfect. Now, what I also want to see is the open rate. An open rate is something I created a calculation for. So add it to series 2. But now if we look at the numbers, you're like, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, right? Opened is 100%, unopened goes to 700%. What? Well, that's because you're splitting something that's not supposed to be split. So how do we kind of go around this. We go to series 2 configuration. We say that we want to customize this series, but we don't want to split it by a legend. That's one part of it. The other, it's a percentage, and this one goes to 100 basically. I can't really put it on the same value, right? Because 100% is going to be 1. That's the decimal number for 100%. It's 1. So what I can do is say, first of all, okay, this is going to be a line. I don't need a column for that. And in order to make it visible, I'm going to go ahead and assign this to a secondary axis. Okay, cool. Now I also want to understand how the axis looks like. So I go into the formatting options and find and enable secondary y-axis. Since I obviously have missed the formatting option, open up secondary y-axis and say that this is going to be percentage. All right, cool. What else? Let's say I have a threshold that if we have a day or a situation where the open rate is below, I don't know, 85%, for example, I want to see those days when the open rate is below 85%. So I go to Series 2 configuration, enable conditional formatting, and enable solid V color in this case. Change it from based on series to constant value, and the defined value is 0.85. Why is it 0.85? Because it's the decimal value for the percentage. So here now I can quickly highlight and see, okay, so there's a dip right here. There's a dip right here. There's a dip right here. Okay, so these days is something that I'm interested in. Now, what else I could do here? We can see that there are 2 dips right here, right? And based on the chart, we can see that there's not a lot of emails being sent on those days. Why is that? That's because if we look at the chart properties, there's something called holiday highlight, which just highlights Saturday and Sunday. It's a very basic approach here. But I can also increase the highlight so the user doesn't get confused, and everything that's between these boundaries is on a weekend. If the open rate on a weekend is below 85%, it's understandable, right? But on a normal day, like for example this one, open rate was only 81%, 81.5 basically, right? So I want to understand what the hell's going on. Who's sending these emails? Who's not opening them? What's the situation, and so forth? Is it a specific department? Was it just, I don't know, something happened within the company? So people were, having, I don't know, let's say team building day or something like that. So the open rate wasn't that high. There can be a lot of explanations to it, but the main idea is to understand why and how, right? So first of all, we understand what happened or how it happened or why is this result. And then we try to describe the scenarios or the situation of how it happened, right? So that one goes for that. What else? In this case, I also created, for example, 2 different donut charts. The reason why I went with the donut charts, in this case, I don't even have multiple layers underneath it. I could play around with this. I could go ahead and say that just have from and to department in the same visual, but then I would limit the user in one or the other way. So what I wanted to be able to do is to do, for example, something like this. So I have a donut chart which shows me the centers by the count of emails sent and receivers. So most of the emails have been sent out by the executive management. Most of the emails received from the whole company goes to the product development team. Okay, I want to understand if the sender is product development and sales, how are they communicating between each other? We can see there's a lot of different departments being involved, right? And I'm actually going to switch the visual to be department to department. And one of the things that we can actually see here is that there is no direct communication between these 2 departments. So sales doesn't communicate directly with product development and vice versa. What they do is they use these 2 departments in between, which are marketing and IT, as basically mediators, right, for the information. They do not communicate directly. Same goes further on. Okay, I want to add customer service. Okay, we can see that customer service, for example, doesn't even communicate directly with sales or product development. Every communication item goes through the IT department. Why is it that? Well, that's another thing. Content next, how to display images in the report. So for example, if you wanted to have, let's say, people's images, what we can do is we have base64 image right here in the connection contact table. And we're gonna go ahead and add that base64 in the source node images and the target node images. Did I miss it? I'm gonna do it like this. Drag it in one of them, move to, and then go it like this. Sometimes it's a little bit easier. So if we add images, one of the things I would most likely recommend is never leave text on top of the image. I think you can agree with me, this just looks ugly. So what we can do is, remember, under nodes default category, for example, we can go ahead and say that the value label is going to be, for example, outside. So now we can focus on images as images. If you don't want to have such a disparity in size, let's say where, for example, you can see here, these nodes are barely visible, where some of these are very easily noticeable, right? Yeah, good luck seeing that one. Well, if that's not the case you want to have, you can go ahead in the formatting options, find min and max radius, and say that, for example, minimum radius is going to be 50%. Okay, so these nodes are a little bit bigger now. Sure, everything kind of has to be zoomed out now a bit more on initial glance, but they're more in sort of sync between each other. So when we get closer, we no longer have the situation where some of the nodes are barely visible, right? If you don't want to have any size difference, well, it's quite simple. Just make them all 100%. What's also interesting with this approach is actually you can do the reverse. So previously, right, if we go back to the default state, if we go to the node, let's reset the layout. There we go. So if we go, we can see that this has a value of 5, right? So it's a very small value. This one has a value of 21 to 60, right? Okay. If you reverse these, sorry, accidentally filtered out. There we go. So if we reverse these values and say that minimum is actually 100, but maximum is 10, you're focusing on those nodes or increasing the size of those nodes which have low values. And if we zoom in, now the bigger nodes which are previously very visible are now barely visible. The reason why this is so important is, think about it like this, right? Sometimes you want to see, for example, who's bringing in, let's say it's sales, right? You want to see who's bringing in the most money. So you want to see the avatar for that person as the biggest node in the graph. Cool. Somebody else is going to say, hey, I want to see the guy who's actually costing us the most money, right? We're paying him salary, but he's just not bringing in any business. His node might be somewhere in between the different, other nodes if we go by the amount that he's bringing in. But if we're taking into account the salary that he's paying, we quickly change up the sizing model, and we can fairly easily find, for example, those who are losing us more money than bringing in. It all depends, of course, on the value that you're physically putting in here, but that's another way on how you can do that. You can also play around with things like additional sizing radiuses. That's also here. So a lot of different options on what you can do here. The one thing, though, that I would definitely recommend is, so watch the recording again. That's one of them. The second thing is, do not forget about all the resources you have available. Academy, report examples, app source web samples, there's a bunch of them. There's documentation, there's just a bunch of information available. That's the second thing. The third thing is, do not be afraid to submit your reports a little bit earlier than your final revision. Let's say at one point you feel comfortable enough, submit that version to us. We can take a look at it, we can give you feedback, and you can enhance the report and resubmit it. We do not limit the amount of times for the ZoomCharts challenge. We do not limit the amount of times on how many you can resubmit your report. So get a feedback, improve your report, and have better chances on winning, right? I can, of course, say it's not all about winning, right? But it increases your chances. It's quite simple. So use that. Get some feedback, see how you can improve on your reports, and just resubmit a new version. If you have two different versions, well, do the following. Submit one version, get the feedback, submit another version, get the feedback for that. Simple as that, right? Just make sure to understand that you can only have one active submission at the end. That's one thing to remember. You cannot have multiple submissions being evaluated. We can submit them as versions of the report, but the final version can only be one. Yeah, what else? A little bit of an off topic, sort of, but in the chat, you're going to notice that my colleague Liana is giving you the link to the forums, right? It's a feedback form. I know we all love them, but I really ask for you guys to just fill it in. It's not going to take a lot of time. I think there's like 3 questions which you can basically answer in a minute or something. But it helps us to understand whether or not you're liking these sessions, whether or not you feel something is missing, whether or not you think this is a waste of time, and so forth. Right? Tell us your honest feedback on these sessions. Because the last thing I want to do is just have a session because of a session. Right? I want these workshops to actually bring you something informative so you can learn something new, so you're gaining something from it. I don't think any one of us wants to spend an hour just because, hey, I had an extra hour, so why not, just sit at a webinar where I'm not learning anything. No, that's not what it's all about. We want to give you as much information and as much insights and tips and tricks and everything as possible. So if there's anything we can also improve upon, let us know that through the feedback forms. If you have any questions, do not forget about the option to reach out to the team by writing an email to webinars@zoomcharts.com. If you want a private session, go into the challenge page, find the booking link, and book a session with me if I have any available time slots. Somebody said, I'm really lost. Why? Anything in particular? Something I can help you with? Yeah, Gordy, of course you get a recording. So the session is recorded, and usually it's 1 or 2 days, and you get a link in the email to the YouTube. I'm happy that you got something out of it, but if there's anything in particular that kind of makes you feel lost the most, like I said, reach out to the team. We're more than happy to help and kind of give you insights and information on things you can do, or kind of additional materials where you can start off to learn about certain things, whether it's calculations, whether it's data modeling or anything, right? The whole environment here is for learning. Making mistakes, learning, that's all good. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is that this time, when we're going to be having the workshop about the top 5, I'm going to have a special guest judge with me. It's also going to be one of the people who judges your reports, and that's going to be my colleague Anschauders, and he's the guy who looks at the design aspect of everything. So he's going to be able to comment a little bit more on design things that you might not guys be noticing, or things to kind of take into consideration and everything. And one of the things that I can highly recommend is, if there are any specific questions that you want us to answer during the workshop, you can also send them to the webinars@zoomcharts.com email, or you can ask them on live. But when it's live session, there's no guarantee that every single question is gonna be answered. If you send us the question prior, there's a higher chance that we include it in the webinar in one shape, form, or whatever. So we're gonna try to answer as much as possible. But if there isn't something specific, just go ahead and ask, right? Don't be afraid. All right, guys, I don't want to waste any more of your time. I know it's precious, and some of you, it's either early in the morning or late at night. Spend time with your loved ones, or just go and have a cold beer or hot coffee or tea, whatever it is you enjoy, and just have an amazing day or night or whatever. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming today, for spending your time here. I hope it was interesting and insightful, and I'll see you in the next workshop. Bye, everyone.